What's going on, everybody? My name is Jake. I'm an amateur triathlete looking to improve in the sport of triathlon, and it's been a while since I've been on YouTube, but we're back. I did Ironman Chattanooga back in May, and I'm going to go over a couple things in this video. The first thing is going to be a little mini race recap from Chattanooga, and then the 8 weeks of training, which I would consider my best training block yet after Chattanooga before 70.3 Maine. So we're about 6 days out from 70.3 Maine. We're going to go over some of the recent training I've been doing, see how things have been going, and we'll talk about how I'm feeling for Maine and some key points to take away from the last 8 weeks of training. So if you like what you see, be sure to drop a like, hit that subscribe button. Let's get right into 70.3 Chattanooga. So I raced that back in May. It was May 17th. I had a pretty solid lead-in training-wise, some 12-hour weeks with some good intensity. I won't go into that too much. We'll get straight into the swim. So it's a 1.4 mile swim actually in Chattanooga. Ironman does that to compensate because there's generally a pretty strong current in Chattanooga, so you swim downriver. So when you swim 1.4 miles with the current, they're kind of trying to think that it'd be around the same time as 1.2 miles, but that ended up not being the case there in Chattanooga. I didn't hear anybody say they felt a current, so all the pros swam pretty slow. Everybody swam, a bit slower. So I'm thinking that there wasn't a current. It was wetsuit legal for the age groupers. The water temp was around 75. So I got right in about 2 minutes after the gun went off for the age groupers, and I felt pretty decent. I kind of wish I would have been able to get in a little bit sooner, but I was lacking a little bit in the corral. Anyway, got in the water, wetsuit legal swim. That's really good for me because I tend to have some sinking in my hips, and that kind of slows me down, especially when it's not wetsuit legal. But there wasn't really too much to note. I felt pretty good in the swim. Got out of the swim, there's a little uphill into transition, nothing crazy, but I decided to walk it just because I was feeling a little bit gassed after the swim, and head into transition, get out on my bike really quickly. On the bike, nutrition strategy, 150 grams of carbs in two 32-ounce bottles, and then was going to go through a couple aid stations, rinse myself off with water, try to cool off. It wasn't a super hot day, but it always helps to try to keep the body temperature under control. In the first mile and a half, there's a pretty gnarly set of railroad tracks that I went over and lost a bottle, which decided it was smart to just stop, grab it, got back out, probably lost like 30 seconds. Otherwise, I was riding with a couple guys, pretty hilly course in Chattanooga, so little rollers and things, so where shorter, lighter guys would pass me on the little uphill dips, and then I'd pass them back on the downhill, so kind of some yo-yoing until about halfway. I rode with one guy for the last, I would say 15 miles. Of course, always keeping the draft legal distance there, but other than that, not really too much to note. It's just a pretty fun and technical bike course in Chattanooga. There was some somewhat rough roads, so if you're planning on doing that one, be aware of it and maybe get out on the course a couple days before. But onto the run, I definitely kept it a bit conservative on the bike in order to have my best run. It's been a lifetime goal of mine for a long time to run sub 130 off the bike, so that was at the top of the priority list. I decided to leave 10 to 15 watts in the tank on the bike in order to have that best run. So Chattanooga, again, is a pretty hilly run course too, but got right out there, was clicking off some 640s, felt good. It's a 2-lap course. There's a pretty gnarly hill about 3/4 of the way through the first lap, and then you hit it again on the second lap, of course, which I decided to walk for both laps just because it was kind of the right thing to do. It seemed like it was really too steep. You couldn't really run up it unless you're at an elite level, so I decided to walk up those, make sure I didn't spike the heart rate, spike the effort level too much. Yeah, then I found myself at mile 10, 11, just keeping myself on track with the nutrition and hitting the aid stations hard if I needed it. I was holding ice in my hands, trying to stay cool. It was probably 75, 80-ish for that run. Not too bad of weather, not too humid, luckily. Ended up finishing the run in 1:28:59, and that's my best run to date, especially off the bike. So super stoked with Chattanooga. That's pretty much it for the race recap. I don't want to get into it too hard. That was probably even a little more than what I originally anticipated it to be. But anyway, we're going to make our way into the last 8 weeks since Chattanooga here before 70.3 Maine. So coming out of Chattanooga, I was very anxious and excited to get my swim better. I only swim about 3 times a week, but I was really excited just in general also to get back to training, and I knew that I had, you know, some improvements that I could make between the two races. So I was averaging right around 15 hours a week of training for the whole 8-week period between the two races. But right after Chattanooga, it was a Sunday race, and I really didn't get back into things until like the following week. I kind of did some easy training, just unstructured stuff, but then that following week was when I really put a foot down and like made sure I was hitting everything how I wanted it to. So here's how a normal week would look for me. And then I'll get into some differences and nuances in how I've trained this block versus how I've trained in other blocks. So Monday mornings, I would always start out at the pool. I get about a 3,000 yard set in. This was kind of like my longer aerobic efforts. So it might be like 3x500, 4x400, stuff like that on some shorter rests, just trying to like anticipate and practice like a race pace type of effort, but nothing too hard. So that's Monday morning. And then Monday evening, I would just have a 1 hour easy spin, which was probably always just right around like 200 to 220 watts, just depending on how my legs felt. Just 1 hour. Sometimes I would put it on the roadie. Oftentimes it would be inside just because the weather was pretty hot normally between the two races. So my Tuesday would look like a 45-minute easy run in the morning, and I'd follow that 45-minute run up with 4 or 5 times 30-second strides, and I'd try to get those to like right around my 1 mile pace just to get the legs moving. Tuesday evening, I would always do some type of harder bike. Generally would consist of like some over-unders, or for a couple weeks I did some VO2 max work, 2-minute reps and things like that at some higher powers, which if any of you guys want like the actual specifics of the power targets and everything, you can go follow me on STRAVA, which I'll put the link in the description. But yeah, I would do some type of hard workout on the bike every Tuesday evening after that run in Tuesday morning. There was a couple weeks, I think 2 or 3 of the weeks out of the 8-week period, I decided not to do any intensity, like structured intensity on the bike, just because of how my body was feeling. And I kind of was rolling with the punches a little bit and decided it just wasn't a good call to force the intensity when I wasn't feeling it. But I think still 5 out of the 8 weeks, I hit those hard sessions. Even when I did decide to cancel the intensity, I still got the volume. So that ride ended up being about 90 minutes, whether I had intensity or whether I didn't. That takes us into Wednesday. Wednesday morning, I would get out for a hard run. So generally that would consist of either the first like 3 or 4 weeks, it was some 800s. And then as we got closer to the race, I lengthened them reps out, and I would start doing 8-minute reps, 10-minute reps, things like that to kind of lengthen the speed out and get more of like a race type of effort. Yeah, every Wednesday morning would be about 9 to 10 miles, and it would have 3 to 6 miles worth of pace work in it. So that was my Wednesday morning. Some Wednesdays decided to get out on the treadmill because it was just way too hot to run effectively. So that's something to keep in consideration if you're thinking about trying to do a session outside. Had the accessibility to get onto a treadmill and stay a lot cooler, it could be way more effective. And also I did that same tactic with a lot of my hard rides as well, because I just feel like you lose so much effectiveness by having to keep yourself cool when you're riding in 80, 90 plus degree temperatures, that you can't get the muscular tension required to create the load needed to create progress or adaptation or stimulus, whichever one. But anyway, Wednesday evening after the hard run in the morning, I would get to the pool for what I would call like my technique swim of the week. So that would be some 50s. I do like a long warm up regardless, and then I do like 10 50s leaving on a minute, and I just try to focus on form. And I do that set like 2 or 3 times through. So that's the swim I would do on Wednesday evening. And that takes us into Thursday. So other than the weekends, Thursday is the only day that I don't do any cardio in the morning. So I get up on Thursday mornings, I do a lift, and it's kind of just a full body circuit lift. If you're interested in that, I'll have to do a video, drop a comment, and let me know if you want to see any more about that. It would take me like around 30 minutes, but then Thursday evening would just be a 2-hour easy ride. Normally just about like 220 to 230 watts, something like that, 2 hours. And most of the time on that Thursday evening, I was starting to feel the fatigue from the Tuesday night hard ride and the Wednesday morning run. So that would be kind of hitting me around Thursday evening. So sometimes this was kind of a harder one to get done, but there was never a week where I decided to cut it short or any of that. So I always got through the 2 hours, and then that takes us into Friday. So Friday, depending on the week, I would have a swim and a run regardless, but just I would maybe do one in the morning, one in the evening, but it was just a 1 hour run, and Fridays would be my harder swim. And I didn't always execute that to my highest ability, partially because of fatigue and then partially because my pool is very hot. Like when it's hot outside, the pool room doesn't have AC and they keep the pool way too hot. Like 85 is like a cold day in that pool, which is just crazy to even say. So anyway, that would be Friday. So we get an hour run done and the harder swim. Sometimes I would just make it like a straight through swim set, like 2K straight, depending on where I was in the block. But that takes us into Saturday. I decided between these two races that I didn't really want to have these big waves in training, meaning have a huge weekend where you have like a huge spike in effort and intensity or just volume, and then the weekdays be like, you know, more mellow. I don't like that variance. So I've been trying to keep the days all like more steady. So like there's not really too many days where I have like a 5 hour, 6 hour day to try to get all this volume in. And what I think that's done is allowed me to handle more because it's more spread out and like evenly dispersed throughout the week. At least that's how I feel. So where I'm kind of coming back to is that Saturday's ride was never over 3.5 hours. And a lot of times it was right around like 3 hours and 15 minutes. But I did put some quality in Saturday's long ride some weeks. I'd say probably 3 out of the 8 weeks I had a quality session. And 2 of those quality sessions were probably in like the last 4 weeks of the block. I would tend to do some like 1 hour straight through tempos. Would be like 1 hour at like 300 watts or something in like a 3 hour and 15 minute ride. I'd do it more towards the end of the ride just to have like a little bit of pre-fatigue to kind of simulate what it would be like to hold that in a race. But yeah, that was my Saturday. It was just a 3 to 3.5 hour ride, and most of the weeks I did it inside on the trainer to stay cool. And then Sundays I have been really working on my run, so I upped my long run to 1 hour and 40 minutes. That whole 8-week period I hit a long run of 1 hour and 40 minutes every single week, which generally would accumulate to about 12 miles. That would happen in the morning on Sunday, and then Sunday evening I would lift. And it was just the same lift as the Thursday lift on rinse and repeat. And then pretty much every week of this whole entire 8-week period was just a rinse and repeat of the last. Now we can kind of get into like the nuances of how I've trained this block versus how I've trained in previous blocks, and kind of how I think that might translate over into the race for Maine. In previous years and in previous training blocks, I kind of would tend to do 3 to 4 weeks where I'm like really pushing the envelope, and then I have 1 week where I'm basically resting for like at least half the week, and then I slowly get back into things. And this time, obviously, I really didn't have any rest days. There was a 51 or 52 day period where I was training on average at least 2 hours a day. And so that is just consistent pressure, just constant pressure, and making sure that I'm just staying consistent. And it's just a different kind of stimulus, because a lot of times I'm not pushing the envelope quite as hard. I'm giving my body a little bit more grace, but the volume's still there. So the pressure's still on, the fire's still burning hot. Probably the main difference in how I'm training, that, and like I said earlier, with my weekends being more like mellow and kind of streamlined as the weekdays training is. With all that being said, we are going to figure out a few things for Maine. There's hopefully a pretty good chance that I'm in my best shape that I've been in, considering all this training that we've talked about. And what I'm pretty interested in is seeing if more is really more. And what I mean by that is I haven't really been able to handle this kind of volume ever. And I think that's a good thing, but also when I was 2 or 3 weeks away from the race, I was really starting to feel it. And I kind of hit a little bit of a second wind like a week later. So like the past week, I've been feeling a bit better, but I kind of had to get over this hump essentially. And it felt like, okay, like I definitely need to rest, but I decided not to. And I decided to hold that constant pressure. So we're gonna kind of see if more really means more. But to kind of wrap back around, I've never really been able to handle this much volume. And I think for like beginner athletes or a lot of people watching this, like at least me personally, like a couple years ago, I was like, when am I going to be able to handle that kind of volume? Like, will I ever be able to handle 15 hours a week? For some people, that's not that much. But for me, it feels like a lot, you know, and I've never been able to handle that much. But I think there's been a couple key takeaways to being able to sustain that volume and hold it comfortably. Now, first things first, training age is very important. There's not going to be many people that are going to be able to jump right into like a 15-hour week and feel good week after week after week after week. Even I still probably can't. There are people that can, and I don't really understand it because I'm not one of those people, but I've seen it. So it's kind of crazy in that how that all works. But first things first, I think recovery is massive. Sleep is your best friend. Like if you're not getting 8 hours of sleep a night, then you probably don't even want to attempt to try to train this much. It's crazy to even say that, unless, you know, there's exceptions to the rule, but generally that's very, very important. Nutrition, very important. Protein, carbs, fats, all need to be in a good balance. I suggest to just try to find what works for you, what you like to eat, and make sure that it fuels your body properly and go for that. But definitely kept an eye on my nutrition in the last 8 weeks, and I think that really helped, and also was really prioritizing sleep and recovery oftentimes. So those couple things. Also was taking creatine the whole time, beta-alanine the whole time, collagen, Pillars collagen, actually I feel like does something. Crazy to say because there's a lot of snake oil stuff, but I do think that Pillars collagen actually does work for me. It seems to keep my joints and tendons and all the other stuff somewhat happy. So I take that, I take a greens powder, creatine, beta-alanine, like I said, and I drink that every day. And other than that, magnesium, multivitamin, fish oil, and then I've been taking an iron supplement because I had low iron levels on my most recent blood tests. So every once in a while I get a rhythm blood test and it tells you your ferritin levels and things. So that's why I wouldn't recommend taking iron if you don't know your levels. So that's what I was taking, and that's pretty much how I believe I've been able to handle more volume. There's been several big sessions go down since Chattanooga, and I'm really looking forward to testing myself and seeing what I can do in 70.3 Maine. It is a really hilly course, but I'm up for the challenge. It's going to be a downriver swim, hilly bike, and a little bit less hilly than the run in Chattanooga. So we'll see. I'm going to try to bike a little bit harder. There's definitely some workouts that have said that I should be able to ride a bit more watts than I did in Chattanooga. So I'm going to probably do a race day vlog. I'd really like to do that. So if you guys want to see that, drop a comment. Again, sorry for the delay and sorry for being off YouTube for a while. I really have just been busy and training 15 hours a week, working 40 hours a week. You know, it's not for the faint of heart. So I appreciate the support from everybody. And if anybody's doing 70.3 Maine, come up and say what's up. I'll be there and happy to chat. So yeah, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you later. Peace.